So let's talk about Israel-Palestine. The latest death count from the health ministry is that 100 Palestinians have been killed. And I believe the last count I saw for the Israeli side was, give me a second, 3. So 100 Gazans, Palestinians, 3 Israelis. That's according to Reuters. And
Reuters, the Hamas propaganda wing of Reuters.
You know, yeah, they're expanding. They're expanding like Citizen Radio. Some of the most
Reuters Al-Qaeda branch.
Some of the most tragic stories to come out of the area lately. 10 members of one family were killed during an Israeli airstrike.
That was the one, just like their house was shelled, right?
Yeah, mostly women and children.
So these are people staying inside the house.
Yeah.
They don't have, Hamas isn't using them as human shields like we hear. They weren't like riding motorcycles. They weren't somehow abetting terrorists. They were doing the safe thing. They were in their homes.
So you bring up the human shields soundbite, and that is used a lot in the mainstream media. Here's what that means. There are a shitload of people living in Gaza. I think it's like 1 point. Do you remember the actual figure?
But it's
a very small area.
It's the size of Washington, D.C.
Right.
And it's like, what's the word? The most densely populated?
Yeah,
is that the word?
Most densely populated.
You have the most people packed into one very small space.
So what that means is anytime Hamas fires a rocket and Israel counterstrikes, they're inevitably almost guaranteed to kill civilians. And what Israel says is, well, if you're shooting rockets amongst a densely populated area, you're using civilians as a human shield. But I mean, they really, if they're going to try to defend themselves, and they do shoot rockets,
right.
It's inevitable that civilians are going to be killed. And they're not overtly trying to use like this family as a human shield.
It's kind of like you go to see Lincoln and it's really crowded, right? And you don't have much room to move. And then somebody shoots a rocket.
So this marked the deadliest single attack and worst civilian tragedy since the current fighting in the Gaza Strip began last week, the LA Times reports. And another horrific story, Israel missiles blasted a tower block that houses many international media for a second straight day. So the first time it happened, maybe they could have said, oh, it was an errant missile. We didn't mean to target media, which is not allowed. You cannot do that. For the second straight day, they blasted this media building, and there are reports that some journalists were killed.
Jesus.
So, I mean, this is really horrific.
Well, at the same time, I was watching CNN this morning. Sorry, my only research was I was at my mother's house watching CNN at 7 in the morning, and she's like, Anderson. But they had Robert Wexler on, who is a congressman, and he was giving all of the sound bites. You know, Hamas wants Israel wiped off the face of the planet, human shields, rockets, blah, blah, blah. He's like, if Israel had their way, there would be peace and their shield. If Hamas had their way, like, all the Jews would be dead. And then they go to show his little title, and there's a little D, because he's a Democrat and an advisor to Barack Obama.
Right.
So when you have the supposed side of peace, not just,
I mean,
not just not siding for peace, but spewing like blatant warmonger propaganda, you have to turn to independent media.
I mean, who thinks the Democrats are the voice of peace at this point?
I mean, moderate Democrats who aren't activists, who aren't like people like our parents.
Authorizing the invasion of the Iraq War, expanding the war in Afghanistan, drone strikes, like how many different warmongering tactics?
Because they watch the mainstream news and they see a Democrat who was on their team, quote unquote, saying these things, and then they think, well, the Democrats wouldn't support this unless it was necessary. You know what I mean? It's one thing when George Bush goes into Iraq. It's another thing when Barack Obama goes into Pakistan. There must be a reason, because Democrats hate war. I mean, you got to remember that the majority of Democrats aren't progressive, and not because they're assholes, but because maybe they don't watch Bill Moyers or Democracy Now!, or they certainly don't listen to us. Maybe they didn't go down to Occupy. Maybe they're really busy. Maybe they have to take care of their kids and they just watch fucking Brian Williams and listen to Barack Obama. And when you hear Barack Obama doesn't sound like Netanyahu. You know what I mean? He's like, Israel has to defend itself, not like we will rain hellfire down. He doesn't sound like George Bush, you know, and all of his fucking comic book rhetoric. So it's like, I really do believe that they think Democrats are the party of peace.
So the weird duality that's happening in America right now is you have a lot of people are like, what is Barack Obama going to do in terms of Israel? But an important factor in that question is Congress, as you were saying, is, you know, provides near unconditional support for Israel. But at the same time, something interesting is happening in this country where we have this incredibly Zionistic Congress, a president that will provide near unconditional support for Israel. Yet CNN just came out with a poll that shows that younger Americans, age 18 to 34, so they asked a question, do you think Israel was justified or unjustified in taking military action against Hamas and the Palestinians in the area known as Gaza? And 45%, only 45% believed it was justified. So not a majority. And that's really extraordinary because what we're finding in America is that younger people have a much more sympathetic attitude towards Palestinians. But we have an extreme Congress who believes the polar opposite.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Well, it's also interesting because like there are generations of Jewish people in America, you know, who remember the Holocaust and anti-Semitism and are really, really staunch supporters of Israel and think that Israel is under like constant attack. And you actually don't really have that many, at least in the public, of those generations of Palestinians.
Right.
Which I think is really interesting that someone brought up to me at the show yesterday. And the other thing I was going to say about that, no, I'm forgetting. Come back. I got nothing.
So I wanted to read this amazing letter that a lot of you sent Jamie and me on Twitter. It's from Gazan Youth. And apparently it was posted on Facebook. It's gone viral. And some of the members from the group, it's called Gaza Youth Breaks Out, sent the letter to Monda Wise. They posted it. And so Monda Wise contacts them and was like, who are you guys? And they responded, we are a group of young people living in Gaza facing different kinds of violence every day. We are looking for change in our country and trying to taste peace. We can't give you names because we are working undercover and we can't have meetings as well for our safety. But I just want to read this letter because they sound like the biggest bunch of badasses ever. And I think a lot of the language is very similar to what we hear in Occupy and other resistance groups all across the globe. So this is the Gazan Youth Manifesto for Change. Fuck Hamas, fuck Israel, fuck Fatah, fuck the UN, fuck Anwar, fuck the USA. We, the youth in Gaza, are so fed up with Israel, Hamas, the occupation, the violations of human rights, and the indifference of the international community. We want to scream and break this wall of silence, injustice, and indifference, like the Israeli F-16s breaking the wall of sound. Scream with all the power in our souls in order to release this immense frustration that consumes us because of this fucking situation we live in. We are like lice between two nails, living a nightmare inside a nightmare. No room for hope, no space for freedom. We are sick of being caught in this political struggle, sick of cold, dark nights with airplanes circling above our homes, sick of innocent farmers getting shot in the buffer zone because they are taking care of their lands, sick of bearded guys walking around with their guns, abusing their power, beating up or incarcerating young people demonstrating for what they believe in. Sick of the wall of shame that separates us from the rest of our country and keeps us imprisoned in a stamp-sized piece of land. Sick of being portrayed as terrorists, homemade fanatics with explosives in our pockets and evil in our eyes. Sick of the indifference we meet from the international community, the so-called experts in expressing concerns and drafting resolutions, but cowards in enforcing anything they agree on. We are sick and tired of living a shitty life, being kept in jail by Israel, beaten up by Hamas, and completely ignored by the rest of the world. There is a revolution growing inside of us, an immense dissatisfaction and frustration that will destroy us unless we find a way of canalizing this energy into something that can challenge the status quo and give us some kind of hope. The final drop that made our hearts tremble with frustration and hopelessness happened the 30th of November, when Hamas's officers came to Sharek Youth Forum, a leading youth organization, with their guns, lies, and aggressiveness, throwing everybody outside, incarcerating some, and prohibiting Sharek from working. A few days later, demonstrators in front of Sharek were beaten and some incarcerated. We are really living a nightmare inside a nightmare. It is difficult to find words for the pressure we are under. We barely survived the Operation Cast Lead, where Israel very effectively bombed the shit out of us, destroying thousands of homes and even more lives and dreams. They did not get rid of Hamas as they intended, but they sure scared us forever and distributed post-traumatic stress syndrome to everybody, as there was nowhere to run. We are youth with heavy hearts. We carry in ourselves a heaviness so immense that it makes it difficult for us to enjoy the sunset. How to enjoy it when dark clouds paint the horizon and bleak memories run past our eyes every time we close them. We smile in order to hide the pain. We laugh in order to forget the war. We hope in order not to commit suicide here and now. During the war, we got the unmistakable feeling that Israel wanted to erase us from the face of the earth. During the last years, Hamas has been doing all they can to control our thoughts, behavior, and aspirations. We are a generation of young people used to facing missiles, carrying what seems to be an impossible mission of living a normal and healthy life, and only barely tolerated by a massive organization that has spread in our society as a malicious cancer disease, causing mayhem and effectively killing all living cells, thoughts, and dreams on its way, as well as paralyzing people with its terror regime. Not to mention the prison we live in, a prison sustained by a so-called democratic country. History is repeating itself in its most cruel way, and nobody seems to care. We are scared. Here in Gaza, we are scared of being incarcerated, interrogated, hit, tortured, bombed, killed. We are afraid of living because every single step we take has to be considered and well thought. There are limitations everywhere. We cannot move as we want, say what we want, do what we want. Sometimes we even can't think what we want because the occupation has occupied our brains and hearts so terrible that it hurts, and it makes us want to shed endless tears of frustration and rage. We do not want to hate. We do not want to feel all of these feelings. We do not want to be victims anymore. Enough. Enough pain, enough tears, enough suffering, enough control, limitations, unjust justifications, terror, torture, excuses, bombings, sleepless nights, dead citizens, black memories, bleak future, heart-aching present, disturbed politics, fanatic politicians, religious bullshit, enough incarceration. We say stop. This is not the future we want. We want three things. We want to be free. We want to be able to live a normal life. We want peace. Is that too much to ask? We are a peace movement consistent of young people in Gaza and supporters elsewhere that will not rest until the truth about Gaza is known by everybody in this whole world, and in such a degree that no more silent consent or loud indifference will be accepted. This is the Gazan Youth's Manifesto for Change. We will start by destroying the occupation that surrounds ourselves. We will break free from this mental incarceration and regain our dignity and self-respect. We will carry our heads high, even though we will face resistance. We will work day and night in order to change these miserable conditions we are living under. We will build dreams where we meet walls. We only hope that you, yes, you reading this statement right now, can support us. In order to find out how, please write on our wall or contact us directly at freegazayouth@hotmail.com. We want to be free. We want to live. We want peace. Free Gaza Youth. Please consider supporting us by taking one or more of the following actions, and I'll post this in the episode recap so everybody can go there and read it themselves. I think it's an extraordinary statement.
That was amazing. I mean, the way it was written, I mean, obviously it was beautiful. It was tragic. It was heartbreaking. But I don't think any of you could dispute the fact that, like, we would be friends with those kids.
That's what's amazing about the internet, because when our media coverage is so crappy, we don't hear these voices. So they say, okay, we're going to write our own manifesto, and boom, it goes viral. And people who ordinarily wouldn't hear these demands or hear how extensive the level of suffering is, like what it does to you psychologically to be occupied.
Well, and not just the level of suffering, and this may sound, I don't know if I can explain this the way I want to, but the media does such a good job of dehumanizing and making victims the other.
Yes.
So you just kind of assume they're all these, like, even when, not us or our listeners, but like people watching the news, when they say like a kid's gonna die, they picture Gazan kids just running around like, oh, like with like fucking dynamite strapped to their chest. When in reality, you hear the opening line of that when it says fuck Hamas, fuck Israel. My first thought is, I talk like that.
Well,
that's how I talk.
And this is what reminds me of Occupy, where they're basically saying fuck our traditional institutions because they have failed us. Yeah. So they're saying fuck Israel, fuck Hamas. And that's how, I mean, Occupy says fuck the Democrats, fuck the Republicans. Right. Shit is fucked up and bullshit. Everywhere we look, these institutions have failed us. And I mean, it's other than being occupied by Israel and you know, the blockade and the constant bombardment with bombs, there's a lot of similarities in the struggle and the resistance. And that's why I think it's really important that everybody shares this letter, posts it, because it does humanize the Palestinians.